Hello and welcome to another edition of Empathy at the Table. I really don't know how to start this intro to our next guest, but I'm going to make an effort. He has 25 years in what we call the gap. He's what we call a pracademic. Giuseppe has spent time as a senior procurement commercial leader at companies like Procter and Gamble, Novartis and Merck, but he's now one of the most respected negotiation educators in the world. In fact, he's listed as number one guru negotiator in the world. Giuseppe has taught at most of the top business schools in Europe, globally ranked number one, and he keeps continue working today. He's an extremely likable, humble human being, and in this conversation, we're going to talk about the difference between experienced negotiators, effective negotiators, and influence, and what influence does in the world of negotiation. My advice to you is pull up a seat, grab a coffee, sit down. We're in for a treat. So welcome Giuseppe Conti to Empathy at the Table.
Hello, Tony. Thank you very much for your kind and warm introduction.
I didn't know where to start with the intro, to be honest with you. I've researched you. I looked at your huge compendium of experience, and I thought, well, I'm going to do a butcher job here if I even attempt to introduce you. But I'd like to maybe, if we kick off, you were an electrical engineer, and then you were in marketing. So you've done the practical side of things. You were in that world, and then for a period of, I think, of about 15 years, you were doing both, right? You were teaching and working at the same time, and today you're teaching. So what I'd like to do is maybe go back a little bit to the beginning and share with us, looking backwards. So if you take where you are now and connect the dots backwards, how is it that you came to do what you're doing today?
Well, I may disappoint, some of the people that are listening to us, but it was not part of a strategic vision and something that I had as a great leader, I had imagined since I was 5. No, I just, studied electronic engineering and did electronic engineering and did my first job as an engineer. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I was no good at it. And I tried to move to a more commercial kind of role. And that led me to move from a manufacturing engineering role in a plant at Procter Gamble to the European headquarters in a procurement job. And that's where I spent a number of years in procurement. And then, in this pursuit to even more commercial kind of roles, I thought that I wanted to work also in marketing. To give you a bit of perspective, at P&G, marketing was really, the best school in the world. So, if you are in marketing, then you're considered really elite. So I said, I would like to work in marketing. So I did an MBA, and then I ended up, moving to Novartis, first in procurement, and then I did the marketing. And as I did marketing, I realized that I was not that good at marketing. Well, I was good at managing suppliers, but I was not the most creative human being, and I didn't have much sensibility about, the right color, the right font, that didn't touch me very much. And so then I went back to procurement. But on top, as I made those kind of things, what's happened that I became an internal trainer. Inside the company, I started to learn the fundamental of training on top of my job, just like this. And I enjoyed it. And maybe it was part of my DNA because my father was a teacher, my mom a teacher, my first sister a teacher, my second sister a teacher. My first sister was a fashion designer, but she was also teaching. So, me being an engineer, there was something wrong with that. So became an internal trainer inside the company. Then the first opportunity to teach happened in 2005. So it's now 21 years ago. And the University of Geneva was looking for somebody to teach negotiation in a master program for procurement. They wanted somebody with real life experience. So I applied and I got the job. Then the year after, I started teaching at IMD and Bocconi. Then in 2008, I started teaching at INSEAD and London Business School. In 2009 at Oxford. And every year I was adding more schools while I continued to work. You know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When I arrived to 11 business school in 2018, I just couldn't cope anymore to have a job and a corporate job and to do the teaching piece. So I left the corporate world in 2018, became a professor in 2019. I also created my own company. The company is called CABL, and we specialize in negotiation and influencing training. And that's
Wow.
where I made the change. But it really was a trial and error
Yeah.
kind of experience more than something that I had planned up front.
It's always interesting because when I look at my life and I look at the life of the people I work with, um, we're sold a story when we're younger that you need to plan where you want to be, and then you need to get your education in order to be able to get the right qualifications to go into industry, to go into employment, and we're sold this story that our life should be a linear set of data points that lead us to where we're going. And I haven't spoken to any guest in the last 2.5 years that tells me, yes, what I'm doing now is exactly what I wanted to do when I was 5. No, it's absolutely not the case. And so I like when you share this, when you connect the dots backwards, you kind of look and you realize um, one thing is clear is that I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to teach people. That was clear. What you were going to teach was not clear. How you were going to teach, where you were going to teach was not clear. But the red thread that runs through is the fact that, yeah, you wanted to impart knowledge. So it's no accident that you're doing what you're doing today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably is no
Um,
accident. Yeah.
We talk about procurement, and offline you asked me, who the audience was, and I said it's not just procurement. The audience is really people who are interested in the world of negotiation. Um, I do want to talk about procurement for a second. When I look at procurement, when I speak to procurement professionals, typically the KPIs is we need to cut costs, we need to create savings for the company, right? That's a typical KPI. What happens when you have a conflicting priority with, for example, sales or partnerships who want to? Their job is to create value, lasting value. What happens when you get this clash of priorities within an organization?
Well, of course, we all know that we tend to do what gets measured. So the
Mm.
fact that, when I started my career in procurement 32 years ago, the number one KPI was cost saving, and 32 years later, the number one KPI is cost saving, then, it tells you that price has been the key driver for so many procurement people. And I work a lot with procurement people, and I really make an effort to make them think broader than price. Because at the end of the day, effective negotiation is about creating incremental value for both parties. It's not that procurement should only care about price and the salespeople should be trying to create value. Both parties should be looking at making it a better deal while claiming a good share of this larger pie that they've done. And sometimes people tell me, well, but my management only cares about price. So, why should they focus about the other things? Now, maybe the management is one thing. If we take the broader company perspective, probably, your internal stakeholder care about other things.
Yeah.
So, there are other things. And I will even say, even if the only things that you care is price, you should still look broader. You should still take into account, multiple variables into the negotiation, and eventually, you let the other party win on those topics in order to have a better price.
Mm.
So, yeah, any good negotiator should be use creativity, should be look at a broader set of issues, and then make effective trades where you get something which is valuable to you, and you give away something which is less valuable to you, but may be valuable for the other part.
I think this is a superb point, and I want to make sure it doesn't get missed. Um, because I agree 100%, and it's a lot of where I focus my work is the idea that there are several negotiations going on at once. So if you're in procurement, yes, maybe one of your main KPIs is cost saving. But as you said, there are other stakeholders in the company. Before you even go out to start talking to suppliers, there are internal stakeholders, and I think I saw one of your interviews where you were advocating bringing as many people into the room as possible into the negotiation. So speak to as many different stakeholders as possible in order to widen your ability to be able to create those concessions and understand.
Exactly. You really need to understand what is value for the company. And if you do not involve the internal stakeholder, you may think that, the only things that matter is cost. And sometimes it's the case, sometimes the company is going through a difficult situation, the margins are very tight and those kind of things. But in other type of situation, maybe availability may be more important, or innovation capability, or sustainability, or et cetera, et cetera. So we need to be
Mm.
clear about what are the priority of the company, and this is best done when you can take the perspectives
Yeah.
of many colleagues. Now, by the way, I'm not advocating to bring many colleagues at the negotiation table, right? Because I think, we all have those horror story where there is a colleague that comes at the negotiation table and reveals the budget, or
Yeah.
tells something about, what is the price of the existing supplier, or those kind of things.
Yeah.
So, that's a more dangerous kind of terrain, but certainly, aligning before the negotiation with many colleagues, that's very
Yeah.
powerful.
It reminds me of a story. I was doing a negotiation with a colleague of mine. I work in conferences and events, so we were negotiating a contract with a large convention center, and I took my colleague in. And before I was briefing him on what to say and how we would do, and he looked at me and he said, "Tony, if you wanted to control the outcome of this negotiation, why did you bring me?" He said, I'm just going to say whatever I feel like saying. So don't bring me in if you really want to ensure that everything works well. So I know that feeling of having somebody say something and you think, oh, why are you revealing all this information now?
Okay. Now let me tell you my trick to try to keep reduce the risk that something
Yeah.
unexpected happens is I define roles. So what I mean is, if I bring another colleague, then I may say, okay, well, let's imagine that I am the commercial person. Then I say, okay, well, you are the engineer, so of course, I will be leading the commercial side, you will be leading the technical side. So, okay, recognizing that I will be the lead negotiator, still, I want you to know that when I'm leading the negotiation, I struggle to listen well. I struggle to take
Mm,
good notes. Uh, can you be the one that really pays a lot of attention to listen and writes very good notes so that we have great records at the end of the negotiation? So that somehow, you give a meaningful role to the
wow.
person,
Yeah.
whether it's
Yeah.
body language observer, listener, note taker, number cruncher, something that will let them focus on something else, give them a meaningful role into the negotiation, and minimizing the risk that they get out of their terrain and
Wow.
give away something that should not.
Yeah, I've just written that down and underlined it twice. That's great. No, because listen, what's really special there is you've highlighted a weakness on your part, which is a strength on the other person's part. So it, as you said, it gives much more meaning to the role rather than just telling them, I want you to do this and do this. I think that's a really key thing. I also want to because I've got you on the podcast, I want to have a talk about the different types of negotiation. So you have different verticals, right? Hostage negotiation, contract negotiation, litigation, sales negotiation, internal conflict negotiation. When you look at this, do you divide negotiation into these verticals, and do you get curious about the experts within those verticals, or do you kind of look at a broad stroke and say, well, everybody, you're all negotiators?
Now, my perspective is the techniques, rules, ideas, principle are the same across the different kind of vertical type of negotiation. Now, having said that, you need, in my opinion, in-depth expertise on that area to be really good. Now, if you send me out there and do a diplomatic negotiation between US and Iran to trying to find an agreement, well, I'm probably going to miss too many of the uh, typical expertise into this kind of diplomatic negotiation that will not make me the best fit. And if you ask me to do an hostage negotiation, I can apply, a number of the techniques that I know, but there may be something that, again, is not
Yeah.
because I've not done
Yeah.
hundreds of hostage negotiation. I've not done hundreds of diplomatic negotiation where I learned, really the ins and out of those kind of things. We see that there are lots of hostage negotiation that go into the commercial type of negotiation. Having said that, then I read also great books, right? On this topic, but somehow there are certain elements which are missing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, let's take the most classical example. Never Split the Difference, the best-selling book in negotiation in the last year. Wonderful book, very well written, a great story, a lot of key message about empathy, a topic that is close to your heart, about listening, about questioning, but there is nothing about claiming value.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
because, when you are doing an hostage negotiator, you are not talking about money. You are not negotiating. There are not,
Yeah.
the kind of claiming value techniques that you will use in a commercial negotiation. So,
Yeah.
vice versa, if I try to go into hostage negotiation, I will certainly be missing some of those key elements that will make me super successful in those kind of things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember when I read the book, I kind of thought to myself, I put the book down, and the first question was, "Does this really work?" That was the first question I asked myself. Does this really work? And some things do, in certain situations, but some things absolutely don't. And one of my good friends, Salva Badillo, is a hostage negotiator. And he said to me, "There's some things in that book that if you did that in real life, you'd be shot straight away." So it just something it just doesn't work. So take it all with a pinch of salt. But I think the book is great because it really has put negotiation on the map. It's almost made negotiation, dare I say, sexy, right? People now don't see it
Yeah.
as so boring. They see it as something that really can improve life. So I'm all for that type of stuff. I also wanted to. I looked at a video of yours, and it was dated. You did it in Dubai in 2016, and it was just you were just about to go into a workshop, and you were talking about making the first offer. What was interesting to me, what attracted me to that was because I thought, I wonder whether things have changed in the last 10 years, right? I wonder whether the advice that you gave in 2016 would change today. And you were given advice on who should give the first offer. And I wonder whether you could maybe expand on that today and see whether the advice has changed over the last 10 years or whether you'd still think they're still first principles and true.
Now, by the way, making the topic of making the first offer is one of those topics where there is continuous research, because it is an area which really inspires the scholar on negotiation to try to understand, all the nitty gritty details on this. But let's start, by giving the broad advice to the people. Now, what the theory says is, if you know the market well, you make the first offer. If you do not know the market well, you let the other person make the first offer. Because, if you give a number which is too high or too low, either you make a bad deal or you lose credibility because you show to the other party that you have no idea about, what is the market. So that's what's the danger of making the first offer. By the way, too often people are afraid of making the first offer. They are afraid. So, in order not to be proven wrong, then the people will say, well, okay, let the other party go first. It feels more safe. It feels more comfortable. I'm going to discover about their interest without revealing mine, etc., etc. And, it's easier, but it's less effective because the research indicates that when you do make the first offer, then you really shape the deal in your direction. But there is one element that maybe many people miss. People think about the first offer only about the number. Okay, I'm going to start with a high number, then, probably I'm going to end up with a high number, with selling a high price, or, if you're in procurement, start with a low number and going for a low number. But it is more than that. It's actually also how you frame the whole negotiation. Let's say the topics that you bring at the table and how the negotiation is going to look different. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine that there is a negotiation between procurement and a consulting company, right? Maybe, one of the tax consulting firms that also takes care of your books and those kind of things. Now, let's imagine procurement goes first. Guess what procurement is going to talk? They're going to talk about price. Times are tough. There is a global crisis. There are wars, etc., etc. So we want to give a 7% price decrease as of the 1st of June. That will be the kind of move of the procurement going first. Now, let's imagine that the salesperson goes first. It's not only about the price that you suggest for the next contract, but you have also the opportunity to shape the agenda, to look at. So you say, well, we have been working with you for the last 5 years. We have some great news. We identified 4 projects where we can help you save more than 20 millions, and we can help you to implement them. Then, we have also seen that your new CFO gets challenged during the quarterly calls, and we can help you to prepare these calls to protect the stock value. Then one of our senior partner is a leading expert of your industry, and then, we can set up a monthly call between your CEO and our senior partner so that we can share insight about what is happening. We can help you with geographical expansion because we have seen that you're not present here and there. We can do you see how a skilled salesperson that makes the first offer is going to shape a completely different deal compared if you let just your counterpart go first.
On this line, maybe we can talk a bit about the kind of shadow things that shape a negotiation. So the things that we don't normally think about, because one thing is the process and the substance, but you've talked about the confidence, right? If you walk into a negotiation and you've done your homework and that you know the market, that just gives you a certain air of confidence walking into the negotiation. And the other person, maybe they might feel intimidated by your presence, or maybe they've just had an argument with a salesperson before and they've walked into the room, but none of that is actually in the negotiation, but it's perceived around there, right? Reputation, things like this. Maybe can you talk a little bit about those other things that we don't pay so much attention to, but absolutely have a direct effect on the outcome of a negotiation?
Yeah, let's talk for a moment about body language. And tonight I'm going to have dinner with Greg Williams, a great friend of mine
Wonderful. Yeah, yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
he has written a number of books on body
Wonderful.
language, etc., etc. And uh, for instance, a recent research from India, INSEAD, indicates that even when you are in a difficult situation, maybe you're in a sole source supply, you have only one supplier and those kind of things, the fact that you convey a body language which is confident, which is assertive, maybe the language that you use, which are more direct, etc., help you to get better results than compare if you go in with a closed posture and with a weak voice, feeling that okay, you're in trouble because you don't have alternatives in those type of negotiation. Let me talk, by the way, about another topic, and I know that you're a master at this, is the use of the voice. All right, people may not know much about the research which is associated about the use of the voice, but certainly people will talk with a falling intonation. So at the end of the sentence, the voice goes down. They
Mm.
talk with a low pitch. Look at all the motivational leader, motivational speaker, the Tony Robbins of this world. They really work on lowering their pitch, and you avoid having filler words. I see actually in those kind of things. You have some variation into your voice, into your volume. You put some emphasis on the keywords. You use pauses. Also, giving short messages. These are all elements which associate with being more persuasive in your communication than simply the substance. Let me make one more point, and that is often neglected. One of the things that can help you to be more effective in negotiation is defining the process.
Mm.
So what do I mean with defining the process? Is before you start talking about the essence of the deal, about the substance, decide how you're going to negotiate. Decide common rules about what the negotiation is about. What do I mean is, let's say that the contract is expiring at the end of the year. And then it says, okay, if I want to make a tender, then I need 6 months. So by the end of June, I need to take a decision about whether I'm going to renew the contract or whether I'm going to make a tender. So I come to you and tell you, okay, Tony, by the end of June, we should take a decision about whether we are going to renew our agreement or not. Then, if we want to take a decision by the end of June, how many meetings do we need? Are they going to be face-to-face? Are they going to be virtual? Who is going to attend? Are the people decision maker or not? Okay, they're not decision makers, so they need to have some people, some time inside the organization to make it happen. Okay, so what is really realistic for you to get this buy-in? What may delay the process? There are school holidays, there are summer holidays, whatever, anything that may happen. There is a big event into that company, the 100 years of the company, that is going to take the people attention away, etc., etc. And okay, then we say, okay, we're going to start with the first meeting. Okay, the next meeting is going to be next week. Who is going to attend? Which is going to be the agenda? All those kind of things certainly have an impact into having a more
Yeah.
effective negotiation.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, another sterling point that it reduces the tension that comes from unexpected events. And also, I think what it does is sometimes in negotiations, not everybody is an extrovert, right? People have this thing in their minds that we're all extroverts to be in the world we're in. Not necessarily. I've negotiated with people who are thorough introverts, and what they love is process, and it levels the playing field when we have a process that we've agreed. So I'll speak first, and then you can maybe comment on what I've said, and then I'd like to ask you some questions, and then we can move on. Make sure that just gives a much more level playing field to everybody and brings all the players in. So I'm thinking now of you, Giuseppe, and being, we talk about the intangibles that people bring into the room, right? So, people bring in a reputation into the room, and that does something. It changes the energy in a negotiation. So you're listed as the number one guru for 2025 and 2026. I mean, yeah, two years in a row, you're listed as the number one. You put your name in, and it comes up there. And there's some real super pros on that list as well. What does that do for you in your energy when you walk into a room? Do you notice anything, perceptive change in the way people respond to you?
Now, first of all, I have to remind myself that this ranking is not true, right? So, remind myself that, there are so many people out there that are so much better than me. And it's true, And my friend Greg Williams that I'm going to see tonight is one of them, right? There are so many bright people that have brought a lot to the world of
Yeah.
negotiation. Now, the only thing is that I communicate a lot. I teach in many business schools. I travel the world. Since I spread, I have a webinar, I have live events, I have monthly videos, I have short videos. So I do a lot of communication. A lot of people knows me, but I do recognize that the fact that I won the award for 2 years in a row is just a measure of popularity, not a measure of competence. And there are many people that I can learn, and I remain curious. I remain willing to learn. Tomorrow I'm going to a conference in Paris and about negotiation artificial intelligence, and I'm really looking forward to learn from people that are smarter than me, brighter than me, that are gonna help me to grow. So I would say that's the first thing that I have to do is on myself, and then the positive thing about having those kind of recognition is probably it helps me to pass the message with my participants, with my workshop participants. People, when they discover that the trainer is the number one global guru negotiation, well, they have a positive bias. They're more likely to invest more. They're more likely to do all the preparation work, etc., because they say, wow, I have a unique opportunity of getting a training with Giuseppe. I better take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm at the point in the conversation where I need to be steering it home now, because it's normally around 35 minutes or so, and my head is saying, yeah, but I've got all these other questions to ask. I've got so many other questions, and I'm trapped. But I've got one more question that I'd like to just get your take on, and so I know you've traveled around the world. Every time I see a video, you're somewhere around the world, and in different places, and that's fantastic. And the kind of people that you engage with are at leadership level. They're influencers. That's a lot of the body of work that you do is around how do we influence people. And when you look across the world, when you look at the people you interact with over the years, what's your gut telling you about the state of leadership today?
Well, I think, we should make a separation between the commercial leadership, political leadership.
Yeah. No.
I don't want to get into political leadership
No,
because,
yeah.
my comments, then
Yeah.
your podcast is going to be blacklisted
Yeah,
from.
no. Thank you for making that point. Yeah, I'm talking around, in the commercial world, in the corporate world, when we look at, because I have a belief, by the way, Giuseppe, I have a belief that the real changes we want to see in the world will start in the private sector. They have to be driven from the private sector. They have to be driven by captains of industry, people who have that level of influence, and better humans make better leaders. So that's kind of where I do my work, not in the political arena whatsoever. So yeah, thank you for that distinction.
I'm often exposed with inspiring people that as I talk to them, you say, wow, that's really makes a difference. Then, you also have to look at where they're operating and the country culture and the country dynamics
Mm.
in which they're operating. So I would say that somehow um, the leader is influenced by the company culture and by the country culture where the company is headquartered.
Mm.
So, from my experience, then I ended up, seeing a different type of behavior, whether maybe the company is located, I'll give you an example for this, just, to be very concrete. A company I've been working a lot, which I admire a lot, is Tetra Pak. Tetra Pak. And Tetra Pak is a Swedish company, and a number of the value of the Swedish culture are then very much incorporated into the philosophy of the leaders that they are at this company. So then you ended up looking with a high level of trust, with a collaborative mindset, and a lot of focus on value creation.
Mm.
And then, if you grow up in a culture which values much value claiming, or
Yeah.
there is more a scarcity mentality than an abundance mentality, then of course it's more difficult for those leaders to fully convey
Yeah.
their ability to change the world in a positive way and make this
Mm.
positive change that we want to see in the world.
I know Tetra Pak very well. I know the CEO Antonio Alfonso very well, and it's true that they do really have a deep focus on empathy and leadership. They invest a lot in their leaders, and I think it's from hearing what you're saying and all my experience, it's actually a mix of both, isn't it? It's the individual values of the leadership, um, packaged with the culture of the
The
actual
company and the country.
the company. Yeah, yeah,
And I think, we all know that actually all of us are shaped by different cultural elements,
yeah.
right? It's not only nationality, but there are plenty of elements
Sure,
that actually shape who
sure.
we are.
Well, Giuseppe, we have come to the end of this incredible conversation. I'm going to say a couple of things. You're based in Europe. You're based in Switzerland. Is that right?
That's correct,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Please, if you ever come to Barcelona, I'm based in Barcelona. If you ever come to Barcelona, please let me know. I would absolutely take the real pleasure in meeting up with you and spending some time.
With great pleasure.
And say hello to Greg. He's been on the show. He's a great guy as well. So please say hi to him. And for our listeners who are probably dying to know more about you, could you please tell our listeners, how can they find you and what is it that you're working on right now that's really exciting?
Okay, so how can they find me? Well, they can look at my website, cabl.ch. There is also a contact form where they can get the email and those kind of things. By the way, they can also buy my new book. That's a way to stay connected. It's called Negotiation Plus Influence Equals Success. A very pragmatic book. He doesn't want to go into negotiation theory. There are already plenty of good books, but it's more about how do we, translate, a real life example from daily work into negotiation lessons. So, typical format of my book is a short paragraph, a story, 3 or 4 key messages that can help us to deal with the typical negotiation and influence challenges. Then what I'm working on, guess what? Artificial intelligence and negotiation. I think,
Yeah.
that's one of the areas that is really taking a lot of our research time, and we are developing plenty of new things that they are focused on really how do we make the human and artificial intelligence work together. My
Mm.
fear is that what I often see that I do a training and people, immediately put the brief into artificial intelligence and get the artificial intelligence to do the work. And guess what? Then they're not going to get the learning. But if we are able, to leverage artificial intelligence to improve our negotiation outcomes, that is going to be the next frontier. and something
Absolutely.
exciting that is coming up in those months.
Absolutely. Um, I'd like to offer you an invitation for a part two at some point because I think I'd like to talk about your book. I like the pragmatic approach that you talk about, and even in this conversation, you've been very pragmatic. You use a lot of examples to highlight some of the things that you're saying, and this AI thing is massive. So I'm publicly offering you a part two, an invitation in the future to come back and share with us on our podcast.
With pleasure, Tori. It was a great
Giuseppe,
fun to talk to you.
it's
Take
been a real
care.
pleasure. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Okay, bye bye.
Bye-bye.